High Noon, directed by Fred Zinnemann, released in 1952 to critical acclaim, Oscar wins, and communist controversy of the McCarthyist Red Scare kind. Somewhat paradoxically for its paranoid detractors, all-American hero Gary Cooper stars as the Marshal Will Kane, who is about to leave the town he served for years to live a quiet life with his newly wedded wife played by Grace Kelly, who is excellent in her second big screen role. Unfortunately for the newlyweds, news comes in that a crazy killer Kane sent to jail for life has been set free by those damn politicians up north and is coming back to town on the noon train, hence the title, and he's seeking revenge on those that sent him there. So Will gets a posse together, and at the end of the film there's a big shootout, and Will kills the bad guy and rides off into the sunset with his new wife, right? Well, no, not exactly. When Will talks to his friends and neighbours, who he served as the best sheriff we've ever had, as they say, he finds that when the going gets tough, he doesn't have half as many friends as he thinks he does. And the film becomes about Will's struggle to find just about anyone to stand alongside him when that train comes in. Gary Cooper strikes his usual look of a strong, silent type as he wanders around the small, dusty frontier town, effortlessly embodying the male American ideal. However, over the course of the film, Cooper's Marshal Will Kane appears dejected and lonely against the empty dirt streets as the townspeople repeatedly refuse to help defend their town or their departing sheriff. There's something in Cooper's eyes that just conveys so much disappointment and a hint of desperation. Definitely only a hint though. He's not the kind of man to beg for help.
All you gotta do is tell the old boys when they come that I'm the new marshal. And tomorrow they can tell the other fellow they're sorry, but the job's filled.
You really mean it, don't you?
Sure.
Well, I can't do it.
Sweat drips down his face after leaving the local church. A couple more lines seem to become visible on his forehead after a former friend's wife tells him his friend is not available. The sheriff sees through the lie, but doesn't push it. The Marshal Kane sees no point in trying to buy, cajole, shame, or persuade people to help him. He only knows stopping Miller is the right thing to do for himself and the town. The whole film hangs off Gary Cooper's performance and how well he managed to play that strong silent type. Before that, Will Kane is told by his newlywed wife Amy, played by Grace Kelly, who is a Quaker and therefore a pacifist, to choose between fighting for himself in the town or to run away with her to avoid any violence. Amy stands out as one of the only characters thinking of a bigger picture as opposed to the small-minded cowardliness of the townspeople. Grace Kelly really holds her own and outshines most of the cast in this, her second performance. And it's easy to see why directors such as Hitchcock cast Grace Kelly in later films. She's magnificent. Amy's probably one of the strongest female characters I can think of in a film from the 50s. Not necessarily high praise considering it's the 50s, but I think she's a stronger, more nuanced character than many 21st century female roles, so whatever. She's unafraid of standing up for herself and intelligently defending her beliefs. In High Noon, pacifism is valued in stark contrast to many other westerns. Don't get me wrong, I love A Fistful of Dollars, but High Noon does something so interesting by bringing a different worldview to westerns. It's no wonder Kelly went on to have the career she did looking at this early performance. She perfectly encompasses the inner strength, dignity, and, yes, grace that the script calls upon her for. Speaking of the script, it's so tightly focused, and it's probably the standout aspect to the film. Every line either reveals something of the film's central ideas or message, or what it wants to explore. Every single line reveals something about the character or about the fallibility of people, and usually both. The central driving force of the film is just that. Communities can and do falter morally under pressure. They are fallible. And no, it's not just a commie plot to undermine the American way of life.
I read an interview that you gave, John, in which you said you objected to High Noon, to the film itself. You said it was un-American.
A whole city of people that have come across the plains and suffered all kinds of hardships are suddenly afraid to help out a sheriff because 3 men are coming into town that are tough. Now he goes to them and pleads them, and he goes into the church, and for some reason the women are all sitting on one side of the church and the men are sitting all on the other side of the church, and he pleads his case. And the men say, no, 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 and the women get up and say, you're yellow, you're cowards. I don't think that ever happens in the United States.
And who saved him from hanging? The politicians up north. I say this is their mess. Let them take care of it. Well, I say this. We've been paying good money right along for a marshal and deputies. Now the first time there's any trouble, we're supposed to take care of it ourselves. Well, what have we been paying for all this time? I say we're not peace officers. This ain't our job. I can't believe I've heard some of the things that have been said here. You all ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Sure, we paid this man, and he was the best marshal this town ever had. It ain't his trouble. It's ours. I tell you, if we don't do what's right, we're going to have plenty more trouble. So there ain't but one thing to do now, and you all know what that is. Go ahead, Jimmy. This whole thing's been handled wrong. Here's those 3 killers walking the streets bold as brass. Why didn't you arrest them, Marshal? Why didn't you put them in jail where they ought to be? Then we'd only have Miller to worry about instead of the 4 of them. I haven't anything to arrest them for, Mr. Trumbull. They haven't done anything. There's no law against them sitting on a bench at the depot.
I can't listen to any more of this. What's the matter with you people? Don't you remember when a decent woman couldn't walk down the street in broad daylight? Don't you remember when this wasn't a fit place to bring up a child? How can you sit here and talk and talk and talk like this?
What are we all getting so excited about? How do we know Miller's on that train anyway?
We can be pretty sure he's on it. Time's getting short. Parson, you got anything to say?
I don't know. The commandments say thou shalt not kill, but we hire men to go out and do it for us. The right and the wrong seem pretty clear here. But if you're asking me to tell my people to go out and kill, and maybe get themselves killed, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say.
It's a story much older than America and as old as humanity.
In the 5th century BC, the citizens of Athens, having suffered grievously under a tyrant, managed to depose and banish him. However, when he returned some years later with an army of mercenaries, those same citizens not only opened the gates for him, but stood by while he executed members of the legal government.
Society or community or just mass groups of people fail the morally good individual on a regular basis. Fear, apathy, indecision, greed, resentment all make their appearances and all miss the bigger and yet simpler picture. If they don't help Will Kane, he will probably die either in the town or being chased down in the middle of nowhere. And not only that, it shows the lack of community, the lack of caring in their town. Who will want to live in a town where they open their arms to the bad guys and let their last sheriff be hunted down in the middle of nowhere? No one would want to live in a place like that. But it's not their problem, as they say. There are so many great scenes throughout High Noon that I don't want to spoil any more about the themes, but that's my best attempt to sum it up. In High Noon, fear stops groups of people acting in the face of danger, and causes the lack of will to do the right thing under pressure. And the thing piling on the most pressure in High Noon is time. The entire film is 1 hour and 25 minutes long, and the entirety of the film happens in real time, barring a few cut scenes. Despite that, the anticipation of that real time, and copious shots of clocks and train tracks that the High Noon train is coming on, is highly effective in raising the tension to the very extremes. There is only one man on the Noon train, and yet the terror the town feels is positively existential. Just check out this shot of the train tracks going into the vanishing point. It's downright eerie. I'll never forget watching this film at my grandparents' house and watching the clocks counting down to the bad guy's arrival. Oh, and this.
Why must you be so stupid, Will? Have you forgotten what he is? Have you forgotten what he's done to people? Have you forgotten that he's crazy? Don't you remember when he sat in that chair and said, "You'll never hang me, I'll come back. I'll kill you, Will Kane. I swear it, I'll kill you."
Yeah, that chair scared the shit out of me as a child. And to this day, the montage leading up to Miller's arrival as Will writes his last will and testament gives me chills every time I see it. The music, the editing, the shots of the different characters from the town's faces, everything comes together in that scene. It just evokes that feeling of absolute dread. One could say the villain Frank Miller doesn't live up to the hype, and I wouldn't be able to argue against that. He's kind of just a bad cowboy, and the way the film masterfully builds him up, it's like he's the Dark Knight's Joker, but you see him, and he's just a guy with a cowboy hat, and it's a pretty big letdown. I mean, does he even have a scar? I don't think, maybe he has a scar of a small scar, but he's just going around saying, "Hey, don't do that, I'm the bad guy." There's nothing to him in his performance or in his costume. The actor gives him all the charisma of a wooden spoon, but I think I can overlook this somewhat minor flaw because the whole focus on the film isn't about Cooper versus the bad guy. It's about his abandonment by the town and his lonely crusade to follow his own moral code and ideals against those negative outside pressures. Considering the tone, the grim, kind of sad tone of the film up to now, you do wonder if he will beat the 4 bad guys. The film does do a great job of leaving you in a hopeless place just before the final fight. I haven't mentioned a bunch of interesting characters because I don't want to spoil the experience of you guys getting to know these deep, well-written and flawed characters and understanding how they fit into the story and the narrative themes that go along with them. All the characters add to the conversation, and it is a conversation / exploration more than a message, which I love about the film. All the characters add to the conversation the film is having about the nature of people. Fear, greed and apathy are all well represented in the town. My favourite performances and characters that I haven't already mentioned would have to be Mexican businesswoman Helen Ramirez, played by Katie Jurado, Kane's deputy Harvey, played by Lloyd Bridges, who I don't think puts a foot wrong in this performance, Marshall Howell, played by Lon Chaney Jr., the slimy hotel clerk, the mayor, played by Thomas Mitchell of Gone with the Wind fame. I could go on, the cast is great. Perhaps there's a couple bit roles who feel a little too 50s stylized, as if they're trying a bit too hard to act in a cowboy film. But apart from that, the acting is superb. So, with all of that said, the strongest connection I have to this film is a pretty personal one, as it was one of my granddad's favourite films, and he showed it to my brother and I many times when we were kids. So it's something I connect to him very strongly to this day. As an adult, I appreciate so much more about it thematically, as well as the context in which it was made. But the most impactful thing about it for me is the character of Will Kane and his personal code of honour in a world that doesn't have time for morality. High Noon is a movie about when you're full of fear and alone, but you have to find ways to face your demons head on. The people you surround yourself with are weak, greedy, and want you to fail, but you have to find a way to do the right thing for you. It's about a man going against the odds and against the tide of public opinion. And the amount of fear in making that kind of decision cannot be over-exaggerated. So I'm thinking High Noon is a 9 out of 10 for me. It's a very personal score, but even discounting my connection to the film, I find the story, themes, characters, everything deep and enriching, and the filmmaking itself exciting with such a clear vision of what the film is. If you want a smart Western film with challenging themes about human nature or just a story of one man against the odds, I highly recommend this film. It's great as a thriller, it's great to look deeply at, it's great to just throw on and just watch. I highly recommend this film if you want any of those things. It's a great film for everyone, anyone, no matter where you are on the film watching scales. You will probably enjoy this, I would say, unless you're John Wayne, in which case I can't help you. I really could have gone on for much longer, but I didn't want to bore everyone with my detailed analysis of High Noon. But I could go on probably for a couple hours. I wrote a hell of a lot for this review. I didn't know how to put it all together, but this is the very small version of my review. So there it is. Just because every line of dialogue has such a clear meaning to it. Some people might not like that, find it a bit too signpost, a bit too on the nose perhaps, but I don't know, I like it. Because it's not really coming up with any answers, it's just coming up with examples and questions about the human experience, which I think it's the highest compliment I can pay. If something is hit upon something so fundamental, I can't really pay it any higher respects. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.